Randall Kleiser's first feature, his first feature was the most successful musical ever made, Grease. Other credits include Blue Lagoon, The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, Summer Lovers, Flight of the Navigator, White Fang, North Shore, Getting It Right, Love Wrecked, and It's My Party. Also, he started working in 70 millimeter and started working in 3D. There's a big thing going on now with a high definition or a high frame rate in 70 millimeter. Mm-hmm. He was doing this with Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, which has been running for over a decade at Disney parks in Anaheim, Orlando, Tokyo, and I assume Paris as well. And that led to a government signing him up for a project for doing a 360-degree high-def simulator to train soldiers to deal with IEDs, the improvised explosive devices in Afghanistan. And I've been a huge fan of his for a long time, and I worked on a music video that was, I believe, we rented your swimming pool for a project. Do you ever remember renting out your swimming pool for various projects?
Well, yes, we've used it quite a bit. I used it in It's My Party, and I think there was, there was yes, I think that I remember that music video. Wasn't there all kinds of weird lighting and stuff?
Yeah. I had nothing creative to do with that. It's just, but
I see.
I was so excited to be, to be on your property, and
oh, thanks.
But I'm absolutely a huge fan, and when I was, I have to tell you, you sort of ruined my my high school years. I was in school when The Boy in the Plastic Bubble came out on television.
Right.
And every girl in school, and you couldn't even talk to girls at that point. When it was just when that show came out, it was like, oh, did you see when she rode the horse over the? It was like you couldn't make it with girls at that time when that show came out. But can you tell me how you go from how do you go from having your first feature film, be Grease, and that you just can't wrap your head around the success that must have had for you? And
well, at the time, we didn't know what it was going to be, whether it was going to be a hit or not, because it was a small teen musical. It had been on Broadway and had some success, but nobody ever predicted that it would take off the way it did. And that summer, it was #1 at the box office every week, which, never happens these days. You have maybe 2 weeks. But, and the songs were playing on the radio. Whenever I would drive in my car, I'd flip around on the stations and they were all playing on there. It was just really quite a trip. And, I went over to Europe for the opening in London, and there was a riot in Leicester Square, and the crowds were shaking. There were limousine rocking it back and forth for John, and we had hundreds of policemen, bodies that were facing each other and linked arms, and we had to push our way through them all. It was really like a whirlwind. Very exciting.
I assume you were in your early 20s, right? Is that?
No, I was 31.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Wow. You see, you have one of those faces that doesn't age. Is it true that you were, in fact, once the Marlboro Man on the billboards?
No, I was a Pepsi boy on the billboard.
You were a Pepsi boy.
Yes.
Now, were you a surfer?
Yeah, I used to surf. I loved it, and right now it's a little. I have a house on the North Shore on a surfing beach, and it's a little bit dangerous with the coral, so I don't really do it much now unless the waves are real small. It's just so if you get thrown off and you can be smashed into the coral, like we showed in the movie North Shore, which really happens. People get all caught up in that down below.
Yeah, that's some of that footage is amazing. You've done all the things that people say, don't work with kids, don't work with animals, don't work underwater. You attacked those things like in your first films,
Yeah. Well, working with kids, it's like you just have to practically trick them into certain performances. Like in Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, we had a 2-year-old as the star, and were twins, but they didn't even know we were making a movie. I had to trick them into everything. I played games and and get them to look this way, look that way, say words, repeat them, and that's very difficult to try to shoot a whole movie where you're manipulating a child that keeps saying no, and they learn no it too. And these kids learned, "I want to go to my trailer." That was their favorite. That was their favorite line that they would kept saying.
Now, where do you find the experience? And you're living in Southern California. Actually, I can tell you this is kind of a neat thing. I used to work at a place called Victor Duncan in Dallas, Texas. It was a motion picture rental place. And one time,
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and one time there was this guy that came into town, and his name was Christopher Lewis. And this is years and years and years ago. And he had some sort of thing he was telling me about that a new way he was going to raise funds individually, and so I went to watch his setup, or went to watch his little presentation, and all through the thing, first of all he says that he's Loretta Young's son, and then and this is before the internet. This is before you could Google somebody and check them out.
Yeah.
And and he started saying I was Randall Kleiser's roommate and George Lucas's roommate, and I was going, oh, this poor guy, he I don't know, why is he doing this? And then of course
you thought he was making it all up.
I totally thought he was making it up. Turned out everything he said was true, and I just think I would imagine I guess you were roommates, right? Is this when you were in USC?
Well, no, George and Chris and I formed a little company called Sunrise Productions, and we made some little shorts. And we signed a contract saying that we would share all our profits, and I was hoping that would expand into Lucasfilm, but it didn't.
Yeah.
But Chris, yes, we were a triumvirate. We hung out together. We were all in film school together, and Chris was the son of Loretta Young, and I got to hang out with her quite a bit before she passed on. She was beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful.
An ageless beauty, and she eventually asked me to call her Aunt Loretta, which was very, very cool.
Wow, because I thought, when after I got to know him a little bit, and of course I've seen her films and everything, and she is absolutely one of the most beautiful people I think that's ever been on camera. And I was thinking, for you guys, you young filmmakers, was that like the first kind of close glamour that you had at that time?
Yes, well, we had a cinema fraternity, and we used to put on these banquets honoring famous movie icons, and I would always volunteer to help set it up so that I could get a free ticket, and we got to meet people like Gregory Peck and Julie Garland and Jane Wyatt and Mae West and Groucho Marx. All these people came down to school to be honored, sort of like the AFI does now, but we were doing it at USC then, and I had some great conversations and got to meet people, and George Cukor and Robert Wise, I sort of targeted and got to know them, and they invited me to their sets. It was just great.
I read about this, of course, that time period I absolutely love. I've read all this stuff, it's how it's been mythologized, about the USC, that wave of people coming out of USC at that time. And I always love the thing, like where you say you targeted someone and said, okay, hey, I want to get to know them, and you find a mentor, you find someone that will take you under your wing. That just doesn't seem to happen too much anymore. Is that, do you feel that happens, or is it just me?
Well, there's just, back then there was literally a couple hundred film students in the United States, and it was almost like you're taking a basket weaving course. People thought, film students are just there to goof off and watch movies and get an easy A. That was how we were regarded. But now, everyone with an iPhone is a director, and so it's very hard. There's so much competition among young directors to get ahead that has become more cutthroat. I mean, when we went to USC, if we wanted to direct a film, we did. And today, you have to go into a tribunal of peers and teachers and present your ideas, and 1 out of 50 people gets to direct. So it's like totally different and much more tough than it was then.
Well,
except it's easier to do it physically. I mean, with the technology, it's much easier to make movies. But back then, it was easier to get them made because there wasn't all that competition.
I want to talk about your work with the Nina Foch Project. Am I pronouncing her name right, Foch?
Foch, yes.
Yeah, Nina Foch.
Well,
I guess.
yeah.
Well, I was thinking like with. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But like with the Loretta Young, that kind of glamour, I would say for someone to be able to go into into their school and actually see somebody that's worked with Stanley Kubrick or Cecil B. DeMille. I mean, of all these, the thing like American in Paris, Executive Suite, Tales of the City, and I mean that is also another. I always sort of see her as a glamour person as well. But also,
yeah, it was even more exciting for me because the movie that made me want to become a director was The Ten Commandments. When I saw the opening of the Red Sea at 10 years old, I thought, wow, I want to be a director.
Yeah.
And then to arrive at USC and find out that Moses' mother, Bithia, was teaching there, I just was freaked out. And I was only 18, but I somehow got into the class. It was a more advanced class, but I forced my way into it. And from then on, I was hooked on Nina's teachings because she was so smart and so funny and so tough. And it took me many, many years to convince her to let us videotape a semester of her class. And finally, she did, and then she died after that. And we put the 200 hours of footage into a 4-hour course, which is now just coming out online.
Well, I have taken that course, and it is to me an amazing thing because it's like I know this. Maybe I sort of went at it different than someone. I watched everything she did. I mean, I watched every and so she was in my head, and actually I dreamt several dreams about her.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I kind of think that maybe did that happen to you and your fellow students? Did you get so engrossed with her that because she's such a strong personality?
Yeah.
It's like it's just, this to me it's a life-changing thing.
Absolutely.
Seeing her and dealing with her and the way she acts, she'll just change you instantly. And
right. Well, Marshall Herskovitz said it in we have that online too, where he said she wasn't there to teach us; she was there to transform our lives.
Yeah.
I mean, and everybody in the class and people who watch the course can feel that. She was teaching not only acting, directing, but life choices and inspirational ways to live your life and how to treat people. It's just great.
There's some amazing life lessons in the video, in the tutorials.
Mm-hmm.
I guess would you call them lectures? I guess lectures. And
yeah.
And I know a lot of my audience is into film and acting and performance and things like that. But I would also say, if for business, I would say for not that lawyers need any extra help, but I would say the legal industry would probably look at this and say, yeah, I can use a lot of this.
Well, that and singing too. I mean,
Yeah.
any kind of performance, you can use the techniques that she brought up. I think one of the most fun parts to watch is when she analyzes the student's work, because she runs a video and she stops and says, "Now look here. This is where this person should have been looking up instead of their eyes down on the floor, and this is how you get their eyes to look up. Tell them that the camera loves you, and that'll get their eyes up off the floor." Things like that. Little techniques to fix things.
The thing that's amazing about that particular scene is when you're watching that segment, and the actress is coming out, and she is looking. She's walking. The camera's pulling back. I guess you would call that a trucking back.
Dolly, yeah,
dolly
sure.
back. And she's looking down. You instantly feel like, wow, this just doesn't feel right. And she nails it like that, and you wonder, well, why doesn't that feel right to me? Why? And I started thinking, because I know this probably sounds really bad, but how we can be so judgmental about looking at an actor on screen or in a play or something. You just go, well, they just don't look right. And I started thinking, I was looking at the audience that, her classroom, and I was thinking wow, are these guys ever going to make it, Are they ever going to do anything? But then when you see them do their performances and you go, yeah, that poor girl. And then she fixes it and Nina says, this is the way to do it. It changes it. And you go, wait a minute. I mean, it's almost like anybody could, make them. I mean, do you understand what I'm saying? How it's like, it's like you look at somebody on camera and it's like, oh, they just don't look right. But if they followed what Nina's advice is,
partnering.
It's 1,000 times different. It's just
as long as you give someone a partner and some action to play, because as she always said, the camera is a machine that watches you think. So as long as you're thinking, it's working. If you're just sort of like hitting marks and being technical, it's not going to come across well.
Randall, I got to tell you, I think my viewing of cinema and film has changed now after watching this, because she's made me look for things, that like there's a part where an actress is filling a duffel bag with clothes, and she's just shoveling clothes in there, and there's really no contact with any of the clothes or any of the items. Nothing registers on the girl's face, and she nails her for that and says, "Hey, this shirt meant something," and this, and it's just like, I think about trying to watch something later on. It's just like, wow, I can really see where Nina could have changed the face of, if she would have been in charge of a lot of things, our cinema would probably be, far greater than it is right now.
Well, she learned a lot of that from Lee Strasberg and Uta Hagen and Stella Adler. I mean, she channels all their teachings and then combines it with the stuff she learned from being directed by Kubrick and people like that, and Otto Preminger. I mean, the practical stuff that she learned on 50 years or more of being on sets, she integrates into it too, like how to, when you have a leading man who's short, the ways that you can make him look taller. She would talk about in American in Paris how she would flip out of her high heels as she walked across the room so that she'd look shorter than Gene Kelly, and little technical things like that, are thrown throughout the teaching.
She must have been like the best teacher there. I mean, I would imagine her class was hugely popular.
Absolutely. I mean, people try to get into it and take it twice and things like that. You talk to any student that has ever taken the class, and they were sort of transformed by it. And I got to be friends with her, and I took her out to dinner once a week for many years. I mean, I just every time we would get together, I would learn something, because she was so smart and up on news and about history and literature, and she's just a fountain of info.
Can you think of any particular instance where you were on a project and it was like, this idea that Nina had instilled in you was right at your fingertips?
Oh yeah, many times. I mean, she would always talk about how on the first day of any movie that you do, the leading man will challenge you about something, and it can be very small. It can be something doesn't seem important, but it's very critical that you win that fight. And I found that to happen on every set that I was on, and I remembered it, and I knew that I had to win that fight. And other things like doing the homework ahead of time so that you have an action written in your script for every line of what the actor is playing, and you never use it until the actor has a problem, and then you say, well, why don't you play it like to push him away, or to get to let him know that he's lying, things like that, little things in the script that you work out ahead of time. And when you're in a situation where the light's going, or you're going into overtime and the actor has a problem, you look at your script, you know the little direction to give, and you just whisper in their ear, and bam, it works.
I love those segments of the lectures. I love those lectures on this thing because I've done a little bit of acting, and my problem was always just trying to memorize I have the worst memory, and when she talks about breaking down the script, with the intentions, like what is this? What are you going to do here? What is this? What's this feeling? What do you think? It seemed like once you do all that, the words just fall into place in a way.
Well, yes, and also the term sequential linkage is something that she explains, where you're saying one thing and it naturally links to the next thing, so that helps you memorize. If you logically figure out how one line goes to the next, it's easy to memorize because it's logic.
Yeah, I can see so many people that are trying to act, but they're so focused on just trying to memorize the lines that it's all it is just a bunch of words, and it has no emotional context. But when you go and do what she talks about, where you're breaking it down and doing that linkage, it's just it just completely transforms that performance.
It works for songs too, you know. I mean, like lyrics in songs. Julie Andrews and Barry Manilow and Melissa Manchester all hired Nina to help break down their songs like that and give each line of the song an action and a sequential linkage. And Barry Manilow says that, you know, he had no technique at the time, and after Nina, his life changed, and he was able to keep all those songs fresh that he had to keep singing over and over again.
When you were, I guess, when you came up with the idea to videotape her classes, was that a kind of a chore? I mean, was it like almost kind of convince her? Did she resist that in any kind of way? You know,
she did. And the first in 1993, I got her to sit in a chair and just tell all the basics of acting. But I wanted to shoot the class, and she wasn't up for that until years later, and it took me a couple of years. But they're all on this, you know, in the online course. Everything is there. Her sitting in the chair and explaining it, and then the class where she's actually working with the students and showing how it works. So it was tough to convince her. You know, finally she gave in.
That's great. Because,
and I'm glad. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, can you imagine all of this being lost? I mean,
yes, I know. That's why I didn't want to happen. For sure.
I think it's an amazing. I don't know. It's an amazing project just to capture something that it's really sort of intangible. You know what I'm saying? But you know, it's like this woman's, you know, soul that you can actually go online now, or you can get it as a DVD. I guess is it a two set?
If you go to www.ninafochproject.com, you can either order a DVD or the online course now. We've just launched the online course, and we think that's going to work because you can do it on iPads or iPhones and look at it in sections and go back and forth and look at things over again, look at all at once or little pieces. It's all broken into chapters. So if you're in pre-production, you can look at one thing, or if you're casting, you look at that section and just remind yourself of how to treat actors or how to do an audition if you are an actor.
Can you imagine having the ability to, you know, you're a first-time filmmaker or you're an independent filmmaker and you got a project going and you have the ability to go on your iPhone, and when you're stuck with a problem, you can kind of go around, you know, while everyone's on break, you just watch a little bit.
Go to that chapter, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very good thought. I think I'll probably do that myself.
Yeah.
Every time I look at the thing, and I've looked at it a million times, you know, things sink in better, you know. I mean, a lot of these concepts are lofty or they're in the back of your head, but if you can keep looking at it over and over again and see, oh yeah, I forgot about that, you know, and it gets you as a better on the set when you have that freshly in your mind.
Right. Let me ask you this. You know, you've always been a good-looking guy. Because I always thought you was the Marlboro Man. Of course, I don't know where I heard that from, but you're really the Pepsi Cola guy.
Yeah, I don't smoke.
But like, you could have been. You look at pictures of you when you were directing Grease or any of these. You could have been acting. I mean, did you get a lot of offers to act?
I did some acting. I mean, Antonio Banderas used me to play a director in his movie Crazy in Alabama. That was fun. Wow. And I did something for John Landis, a little you know, cameo in one of his films. So I like being in control, you know. I don't like being told what to do. So, you know, I don't think I would have been a good actor.
You know what I'd like to see you do? And speaking of John Landis, he has certainly got an interesting. I don't want to say gig, but you know how he is in almost every documentary. Any cinema documentary, John Landis is in there somewhere talking about something, and I could see you doing that. I mean, I think it would be really good for you to be in that kind of position where you could talk to young filmmakers or tell a new generation about you know, the way things are.
Well, I do go to film schools and film festivals, usually taking along the Nina Foch course, and show clips and then talk about how different directors, including myself, have used those concepts practically. And another thing that's interesting is there's a documentary coming out on John Milius, my other classmate. And I just saw it the other night. It's just wonderful. I mean, he has everybody in town talking about John. I mean, Spielberg and Scorsese and Coppola and Lucas, and John appears in the documentary quite a bit. And he had a stroke recently, and it talks about how he's trying to get back his faculties. And it's very moving.
Wow.
It's very funny. It's a great documentary. I think it's going to be called Milius, and that's coming out soon.
Wow. He's like an interesting guy. I've met him a couple of times, and he is really like he's really like a Hemingway kind of guy.
Well, he creates that image.
Yeah. And he told me this wonderful story about he did some movie. I don't know if he wrote it or directed, but he did it in exchange for a rifle or some rare antique.
Yes. Well, I think some of that stuff he did just because of the legendary aspects of it. He knew that it'd be a good story. I don't even know if it's true, but it might be. But I can see him doing it just because he wanted to further his legend.
Yeah. Now, when you and Christopher Lewis and George Lucas and all the USC guys were hanging out. I mean, was George? Did he work on cars a lot? I mean, did you see? I mean, he always seemed like he drove like a fast car, and
Yeah, well, he had a Camaro actually that when we were roommates, but he would drive it like a race car. I mean, when we'd be driving on Mulholland, he would, if the road was all curvy, he'd go straight down the middle of the curves and stuff. And I got very nervous about getting, running into something, but. Yeah, he loved cars, and he made a film well, I think, he had an accident when he was young.
Yeah.
But it didn't seem to change his love of cars. And I know that he's driven race cars in the Long Beach Grand Prix occasionally, so he's obsessed with that.
A few years back when his Phantom Menace was coming out, I used to be on the radio in Modesto and in Stockton at the same time, and that was like his country, when he was growing up. And there was a listener that called in and told us this great story where the listener was a high school kid, and he was going down this road, and he liked cars, and his car broke down, so he had the hood up and he was working on it, and then this big car pulls over out in the middle of nowhere, and George gets out but he didn't.
Helping?
Yeah, he had no idea who George Lucas was.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. And he's this guy getting his hands greasy under the kid's car, and he says, and then he finds out later it was George Lucas, and he was just like, I just love that story. So
yeah, that sounds cool.
So I'm okay. You how did George help you out? Because I know Nina was his teacher as well, but he must have been.
Well, I don't think George actually took Nina's class. I really I brought her up to Skywalker Ranch. We'd run into each other at an event at USC, and I flew up with Nina, and we had lunch with George, and I told him how much, her teachings needed to be preserved, and he said okay. So he put up the initial funds, but he at the time did not make the transition. You see, she was not in the film department; she was over in the drama department. So I had to leave the cinema department and go over and weasel my way into that. And I guess I was the only cinema major who did that. All the other guys just didn't think to do that. But because I was so obsessed with the Ten Commandments, I really wanted to learn from her. So later on, she was brought into the cinema department, but she started out in drama.
There was a period where I was really obsessed with Cecil B. DeMille. I used to get all his biographies, and I'd watch all the versions, of how he would do different things, and of course this Sunset Boulevard, his bit in there is just fantastic. And was there anything? Did she ever impart any kind of little story about him to you that?
About DeMille you're talking about?
Yeah.
Well, yes, there was one thing that we even show in the DVD where he was giving her a line reading, and Nina had her own ideas about how to do the line reading, and she describes how she went up against DeMille and demanded that, or just asked if she could do her version. And he allowed her to, and then in the next day in dailies, he said, well, which one do you like? And she says, well, I like my line reading. And he says, well, you're right, but you didn't do mine as well. So she was standing up to Cecil B. DeMille, which nobody did at those days.
He wasn't going to let her get away with it, even though he's going to choose her way.
Yeah,
it was
he had to fight back too.
Yeah. So now, do you have that with? I mean, I guess an actor would, like you were saying, like when you're doing, like the first day of a film, your leading actor, because of insecurities, will try to pick a fight with you or try to, cause some sort of thing. Do you think that happens with if you're an actor, that a director sometimes will, have that kind of thing where you have to sort of stand your ground, or is that?
Well, you have to find out who's in charge, and if you have a big actor, a star, or even just a leading man of any kind, they want to know they have somebody who's going to help them and be in charge. Or they don't, so they test to see if are you going to stop me, or are you going to make this change, or who's in charge here. And if you lose that first battle, then they just don't trust you, and they walk all over you, and it's not good.
Mm. Now, when I was going to say, when you were in school, there must have been some guy in class or some girl in class you thought, like, wow, this person's really going to make it, and then you just maybe after the student project, just nothing really, was there anything like that where you thought, like, this person's got it, and nothing ever happened?
Yeah, there were people back at USC in the film department in the 60s who were quiet and just did the work. People like Caleb Deschanel and Walter Murch, who all became very, very successful. And then there were certain people who were arrogant and sort of saying, well, the moment I walk out of here, I'm going to take over the industry. And those people have vanished.
Oh, man.
The arrogant ones that just were so full of themselves and sort of like were really putting down everyone else as being talentless and making dumb movies. I don't know where they went. They're not around.
I guess I want to also. Is there a situation where you've had these successes, you've done films? Is this ever? I know sometimes it doesn't happen till someone like Spielberg and some of these other people. They go like. It's like it doesn't make any difference how much money they have. They still have to tell stories, and they're just going to keep going and keep going and keep going. But I would, the thing is like, I don't know. It's like if I had like a lot of money, I think I would just go surfing, or I mean, how do you find the motivation to go? Okay, yeah, I want to tell some more films, and I want to do that battle again. That kind of.
Yeah, I think it's just an obsession that filmmakers have. I mean, you want to tell stories, and it's in your genes, in your DNA, and you feel very restless if you can. And I've been feeling restless lately because of trying to raise money, which is very hard these days. And I have all kinds of movies that I want to make, and I have scripts and budgets, and we're getting close on a couple, but it's just such a I mean, when I started out, it was like, the studio would say, come direct this. And you'd show up, and you say action and cut and shoot it, and that was it. Now, you have to be a fundraiser. You have to be a financial guy, and you have to spend lots and lots of time in meetings with financial people trying to get money, and it's just not the same and not fun.
Yeah, I imagine people are kind of surprised with the Hitchcock movie that came out, where they probably never even realized that Alfred Hitchcock actually had to fund Psycho.
Yeah, that was very, very unusual, wasn't it?
Yeah. And I started
shocked.
Yeah, and I started thinking like, wow, I wonder how often this actually has to take place, and and it to me, because I love the history of Hollywood and everything, and I loved the old studio heads that were gamblers, they were rascals, they were and I love those stories where. You hear like, what am I trying to say? King Vidor. He would go in and he'd say, okay, this is the movie I want to do. And they go, okay, let's do it, And it would be like the guy was gambling
one guy.
You. Yeah.
Yeah, one guy, like Jack Warner or Daryl Zanuck were running studios. And if you convinced them, you had it made.
Why can't we have that now? Why can't that be the way it is?
Well, the movies are such a big gamble now, and corporations have taken over, and they have committees. And even if a studio head wants to make a movie, if the marketing department says, we don't think this is going to sell, it's killed. So there's big committees doing everything now. There's not one guy. The last time I worked with somebody who was a real decision maker was Frank Price at Columbia, when he gave me the green light for Blue Lagoon and just said, go off and make it, and didn't even ask anything about the casting or where we were shooting or anything. He just trusted me to do that. So that doesn't happen anymore.
I would think, doing the Honey, I Shrunk the Audience 70 millimeter 3D ride kind of thing, and having the government come to you and say, hey, can you do a 360 degree high def simulator for, I guess it was like a Humvee simulator? Is that what?
Yeah. It was the soldiers, the trainees get into a Humvee. There's circle vision around them, which we filmed in an Afghan location, the one they use for Iron Man up in near Mammoth in California.
I was going to say Barstow or something.
But they gave us this whole huge park, which we outfitted with sets like it was in Afghanistan, and we put bombs all over the place, fake ones, and the trainees drive through with a Humvee, and if they spot the bomb, they go around it, and if they don't, they experience an explosion, which is done with the technology used in theme parks. We had theme park people come in and put hydraulic lifts under the Humvee and special effects explosions and smoke, and even like a high-pitched whine afterwards, like your ears have been burned out. And what it does for these soldiers is, once they go through that, if it ever happens to them, they don't just totally freak out and stagger out of the Humvee where they can be picked off by snipers. They can have their wits about them and even help a fellow soldier who maybe has been really badly hurt. They can help them out and do all that stuff that they would normally not do. They'd just be going around saying, holy F,
Yeah. I'm really surprised. I saw some footage of it, and I was thinking, wow, they're really not holding back on that, on the hydraulics or the jarring.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you really shake those guys up, and I was thinking, like, wow, I don't know.
It's scary when you're in it, because you never know when the bomb's going to go off, and when it does, it really feels like you've been in an explosion.
Now, did you come up with the idea and approach the government, or did they come to you and say, hey, we want you to? I mean, how does something like that work?
Well, I worked with Richard Lindheim at the Institute for Creative Technologies at USC on several other projects, and he was the one who came to me and said, we want to do this simulator. And so we all worked together with these people from the theme parks and people from like Dave Stump, who I'd worked with on a virtual set movie called Red Riding Hood, who knew high-tech stuff, and he came up with his people, came up with this 360-degree camera. I mean, it was like 7 cameras shooting into 7 mirrors hung from a crane, so that, and then on the back of the camera car, we had another camera shooting what was behind us, so we could fill in where the camera car was. It was very complicated, but it looked great.
Wow.
And when you're in it, you really feel like you're driving along in Afghanistan.
Now, how do you feel about the high frame rate? 48 frames, 60. I don't know if it's 65 frames or 60 frames.
60. I'll tell you. I saw back in the 70s, Doug Trumbull did a 60 frame per second,
show
70
scan.
millimeter thing, show scan, yeah. And that was just unbelievable because you felt like you were looking at reality. I think the 48 frames is not quite enough to give you that feeling. It does a little bit, but Cameron is shooting Avatar 2 in 60 frames, and I think that will be a little different. I mean, it's funny how your eyes see things, and at times in The Hobbit it looked real, and other times it looked sort of video-like. It's a new way of shooting, but goes back to the old way, and I think the 60 frames, from what I've read about how the brain processes images, is going to be closer to reality and maybe work better.
Is that anything on any of your your upcoming projects that you'd like to try to look into and using that kind of technology? Or? I
do have a sci-fi movie that I'm developing, and I want to see how it looks with Avatar before I make that jump. But I guess, from what I understand, it doesn't cost more to do it. Although now that I think about it, it must be a lot more, lot more file size. So maybe it does cost more in the editing. I don't know how that all works yet. I'm looking into it though.
Well, I would love to see you do something. I don't want to be too gimmicky, but and I'm not really a fan of the 3D stuff. There's a couple of times I've gone where you've got the goggles that they got the crystal that blink on and off, and I think those are pretty good. But then you feel uncomfortable because you're wearing this giant headgear. But when I was in Texas, when I was a kid, when I was working at the motion picture rental place, Victor Duncan, around that time, I think it was, I don't know if it was Chuck E. Cheese, but there was some pizza place that came out, and Doug Trumbull had done their little thing with ShowScan, and it was like, and I remember seeing it, and it was like, I thought it was like someone opened up a window. And
exactly.
And I remember thinking like, man, this is the way movies are going to be, and that was like 30-something years ago.
It's funny. Michael Eisner was running Paramount when we did Grease, and the original thought was to do the last reel of Grease in ShowScan.
Wow.
It would have been really interesting. The whole carnival stuff where they're dancing, and we talked about it, and we it just turned out to be, it was too difficult to outfit all the theaters with 70 millimeter for that last reel. But what an interesting idea that was, and it would have been fun.
Can you imagine when the car starts flying up through the clouds? What
yes.
that view would be great. Randall Kleiser, it's fantastic that you gave me the opportunity to actually finally meet you, and talk to you. I've been a huge fan of your work, and I continue to be a fan of your work. And I've followed your career, and I want to see more projects, from you. And the Nina Foch Project, the course is fantastic. If someone wants just to get the 2-set DVD, they can get that, or they can, which I actually think is better, is to go online to this. I guess it's Udemy. Is that how you pronounce the?
Yeah, Udemy.com, or you can go through our website, ninafochproject.com. Either way to get to it, but. Yeah, I think it's really the way to absorb it, where you can do it on your little laptop or your handheld device, any chapter you want.
If there's anything in the future you got coming up, and you I would love to talk about anything else you got going on. So
well, thanks so much.
That's
really nice of you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it a lot.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.